Time is running out. A little over 2 hours ago, a ceasefire was signed, agreeing to bring the Korean War to an end at 10 p.m. tonight. But it's not good news for everyone. Having downed 9 enemy aircraft, U.S. Air Force pilot Captain Ralph Parr is just one victory away from joining the hallowed ranks of aviators with the elite status of double ace, a goal that has turned into a dangerous obsession. Now, he takes his F-86 Sabre out on one final mission. Driven by burning ambition, he frantically scans the horizon, praying he can find just one more target before the war is over. Finally, in a distant patch of clouds, he spots it. It's moving through Chinese airspace, strictly off limits to American pilots. And the target itself is so forbidden that shooting it down could start World War III. Ralph Sherman Parr Jr. was born for combat. The son of a Navy commander who had served in both World Wars, he enlisted in the Army Air Forces in 1942 at just 18 years old. By February 1944, the young man from Portsmouth, Virginia, had earned his wings and commissioned as a second lieutenant and was eager to join the struggle against fascism and show off his skills as a fighter pilot. With characteristic cockiness, he later remarked, quote, "I didn't think I could see anything up there that I thought would be able to take me." Parr flew P-38 Lightnings during World War II, but his service was mostly limited to bases in the United States. He reached the Pacific Theater in August 1945, just in time to witness the smoldering ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki firsthand. But with the war as good as over by the time he got there, he was denied the chance to prove himself in aerial combat, a frustration that would drive him for years to come. When North Korea invaded the South in June 1950, Parr was ready. Initially flying the straight-winged F-80 Shooting Star with the 49th Fighter Group, he completed 165 ground attack missions during the war's opening phase. But ground attack wasn't what Parr really wanted to be doing. He was desperate to engage in air-to-air combat, the ultimate test of a fighter pilot's skill. After his first tour ended in May 1951, Parr spent 2 years back in the United States, developing and practicing new air-to-air tactics, hoping for another chance at combat. His opportunity came in May 1953, when he returned to Korea as an F-86 Sabre pilot with the elite 335th Fighter Squadron. The swept-wing Sabre was the only American fighter that could match the Soviet-built MiG-15s flown by Chinese, North Korean, and, though this remained classified, Soviet pilots in the infamous MiG Alley along the Yalu River. On June 7, 1953, Parr's flight encountered 16 MiG-15s over the Yalu. Descending from 41,000 feet, he found himself vastly outnumbered, but undaunted. His friend, Bob Lehman, would later recall the trademark bravado with which Parr explained what happened next. Quote, in his words, he surrounded the 16 MiGs. Parr destroyed 2 MiGs and damaged another before withdrawing to safety. He'd finally chalked up his first aerial victories. 3 days later, he added a third. On June 18th, he shot down 2 more MiGs while protecting fighter bombers striking North Korean targets, officially gaining the elite status of ace, a pilot with 5 victories or more. But Parr wasn't finished. On June 30th, in the action that would earn him the Distinguished Service Cross, Parr's flight encountered 10 MiGs threatening his wing commander. Despite being dangerously low on fuel, Parr attacked the enemy formation, destroying 2 more MiGs and driving off the rest. His citation praised his extraordinary flying skill and high personal courage. He'd scored 7 victories in less than a month, an impressive rate by anyone's standards. By mid-July, Parr had downed 2 more enemy aircraft, bringing his total to 9 confirmed victories, leaving him 1 away from claiming a place among American double aces. With the armistice approaching, the pressure was immense, both external and internal. Fellow pilots watched to see if the aggressive young captain could reach the magic number before the shooting stopped. For Parr himself, that 10th victory had become an obsession. July 27, 1953, began with a ceremony that should have ended the war. At 10 a.m. Korea time, in the neutral village of Panmunjom, the heads of Chinese and North Korean forces met with the UN Commander-in-Chief to sign an armistice agreement. The Korean War would officially cease 12 hours later at 10 p.m. that evening. But the war wasn't over yet. The 5th Air Force had issued clear instructions. keep up the pressure until the appointed hour. American pilots were to continue flying combat missions right up until the final minute, squeezing every possible advantage from the remaining time. For Ralph Parr, these final hours represented his last chance at immortality. That day, Parr and 7 fellow Sabre pilots found themselves assigned to escort a Marine photo-reconnaissance aircraft on a mission that would take them right through Mig Alley. The reconnaissance plane was tasked with photographing a dirt airfield in the Yalu riverbed, documenting North Korean positions one final time before the ceasefire took effect. The muddy waters of the Yalu River marked the boundary between North Korea and Communist China, a line that American pilots were strictly forbidden to cross. Beyond lay Manchuria, a sanctuary where enemy aircraft could retreat beyond the reach of UN forces. By 12:30 p.m., Parr had reached the Yalu River. Flying his F-86 Sabre at high altitude, he suddenly spotted something unusual, an aircraft flying close to the river on the Manchurian side of the border. Parr descended to investigate. It was a twin-engine transport, much larger than the sleek MiG fighters he was accustomed to engaging. Glancing at the aircraft's insignia, he suddenly realized that it was neither North Korean nor Chinese. It was a Soviet Ilyushin IL-12, known to UN forces by the reporting name Coach. This made the situation much more complicated for Parr. Although the USSR had secretly provided aircraft and pilots to fight for the communists in Korea under Chinese and North Korean markings, it was officially a non-combatant in the conflict, making any attack on a Soviet aircraft, especially a defenseless transport, a move with potentially catastrophic consequences. But Parr's judgment was clouded by weeks of fierce fighting and the pressure of time. The armistice would take effect in less than 10 hours. This might be his last chance. He made a second approach. The IL-12 showed no signs of hostility, made no evasive maneuvers, and appeared to be simply following its flight path. Parr made a third approach. He positioned his Sabre behind the IL-12 and squeezed the trigger. The 6 50 caliber machine guns in the F-86's nose erupted in a devastating burst of fire. Armor-piercing rounds and incendiary bullets tore into the transport aircraft at close range. Parr would later report, quote, "Both engines of the enemy aircraft caught fire, and then the aircraft exploded." At Soviet radar stations monitoring the skies over Manchuria, the controllers had watched in growing alarm. The IL-12 they were tracking had taken off from Port Arthur that afternoon in what should have been a routine passenger flight to Vladivostok, carrying 21 Soviet servicemen returning from duty. While observing the IL-12 fly its routine course, the radio operators had witnessed the appearance of 8 contacts, which they correctly identified as American F-86 Sabres. Moments later, the IL-12 had simply vanished from their screens. Could the Americans really have been so audacious as to cross over the Yalu River, officially off limits, and shoot down a Soviet aircraft? Within hours, the Soviet military machine swung into action. Search teams were dispatched to scour the mountainous terrain of Jilin province, while intelligence officers began piecing together what had happened. Local Chinese residents near the village of Maoero-shan reported hearing unusual sounds around midday. The roar of jet engines, machine gun fire, then a tremendous explosion. They'd seen a large burning aircraft falling from the sky, with objects separating in the air. The implications were staggering. A brazen act of aggression that violated both international law and the sovereignty of a neutral nation. It was, by any definition, an act of war. Parr was initially encouraged to claim he had attacked a different aircraft in order to make the incident more justifiable. He later recalled, quote, "Someone said, 'Why don't we call it a MiG?' I said, 'Why don't we just tell the truth?'" Instead, the Americans opted for a different story. Parr had shot down an IL-12, but it happened in North Korean airspace, not over Chinese territory. But the Soviets weren't buying it. They had their own radar data, their own intelligence reports, and the testimony of Chinese civilians who had witnessed the attack. Now, they had a burning desire for revenge. The crisis escalated with breathtaking speed. In the highest levels of the Kremlin, military commanders and party officials debated their response. Some advocated for immediate retaliation, a proportional strike against American forces that would demonstrate Soviet resolve. Others counseled restraint, warning that any military action could spiral into the global nuclear conflict both superpowers had been desperately trying to avoid. Something had to be done. The only question was what. The Soviet Union's opportunity for response came sooner than anyone expected. For years, American reconnaissance aircraft had been probing Soviet airspace, conducting routine intelligence gathering missions that Moscow typically tolerated with little more than radio warnings or interceptor escorts. It was an accepted part of the Cold War's cat-and-mouse game. But with the shooting down of the IL-12, it was clear that the rules of engagement had fundamentally shifted. So 2 days later, when Soviet Pacific Fleet radar stations picked up an incoming unknown aircraft 130 miles south of Cape Gamow, the reaction was markedly different. 12 minutes after the aircraft was detected, 2 MiG-17 fighters scrambled from the airfield at Nikolaevka, racing to intercept the intruder before it could penetrate Soviet airspace. At 7:01 a.m., Fleet radar confirmed that the unidentified aircraft had crossed into Soviet territorial waters over Peter the Great Bay, continuing toward Askold Island at 10,000 meters. 10 minutes later, Guards Captain Alexander Rybakov finally got a clear look at what they were facing. The aircraft was massive, a 4-engine RB-50 reconnaissance bomber, a militarized version of the B-29 Superfortress, bristling with cameras and electronic surveillance equipment. Painted with distinctive red stripes on its vertical stabilizer and clear U.S. Air Force markings, it was unmistakably American. Rybakov radioed his identification to ground control, confirming the intruder was over Soviet territorial waters. Meanwhile, the American crew, confident in their aircraft's defensive armament and believing themselves protected by international law, maintained their course and altitude. According to Rybakov's official report, he approached the American aircraft to signal that it had violated Soviet airspace and must leave immediately. He later testified, quote, "At the moment of this maneuver, I felt 2 powerful blows to the body and wing of my plane, after which the cabin became depressurized. My wingman reported that the intruder opened fire on us. In response, I fired 2 bursts from the cannons from a close distance. My wingman did the same on my orders. Immediately after this, the intruder plane, with a sharp bank over its wing, went down and disappeared into the solid cloud cover." Whether or not the American RB-50 had actually fired first has remained the source of decades' worth of fierce debate. What is certain is that at 7:16 a.m., just 15 minutes after entering Soviet airspace, the reconnaissance aircraft crashed into the waters 8 miles south of Askold Island. As soon as they got word of what had happened, 4 American rescue aircraft from Japanese airfields were sent to find the crash site, but found their search efforts hampered by thick fog. Nevertheless, by evening, a reconnaissance aircraft reported discovering the wreckage of the B-50, a lifeboat, and 7 people floating near it. Starting at 4 a.m. on July 30th, 5 U.S. Navy ships, a cruiser and 4 destroyers, began scouring the waters 35 miles southeast of Askold Island. Finally, at 6 a.m., the American cruiser reported success. One of the destroyers had pulled co-pilot John Roche from the frigid waters, the sole survivor of the disaster. Roche reported that other crew members had been in the search area, but despite the intensive efforts, only 2 additional bodies were recovered. 13 airmen were declared missing and presumed not to have survived. The world now faced a terrifying reality. In the space of just 2 days, both superpowers directly attacked each other's aircraft and claimed servicemen's lives, acts of war committed by nations that possessed enough nuclear weapons to end human civilization. Less than a decade after the end of World War II, the possibility of another global conflict was now looking dangerously real. As tensions reached new heights, Moscow filed a formal lawsuit against Captain Parr at the International Court of Justice, demanding $1.86 million in compensation and presenting meticulously documented evidence of American violations of Chinese sovereignty. Soviet newspapers published detailed maps showing the IL-12's flight path deep inside Chinese territory, complete with precise coordinates and testimony from Chinese witnesses. Meanwhile, American officials prepared equally aggressive countermeasures. CIA analysts recommended filing competing lawsuits that would use the B-50 incident to shift blame back to Moscow. In Washington, the mood shifted from righteous indignation to barely controlled panic. Military advisors painted increasingly grim scenarios for President Eisenhower. If the Soviets shot down another American aircraft, would the U.S. be obligated to retaliate? If they did retaliate, would Moscow feel compelled to strike American bases? How many steps were there between Captain Parr's burst of gunfire in mushroom clouds over major cities. The Soviet leadership faced identical calculations. In the Kremlin, Marshal Bulganin and his advisors wrestled with the implications of their own actions. It was then that an extraordinary thing happened. Rather than escalating the propaganda war, both sides began a systematic campaign of suppression and silence. American media coverage of both incidents virtually disappeared from newspapers after the initial reports. Soviet publications, having made their point about American aggression, quietly moved on to other topics. The dramatic international crisis that had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war simply vanished from public consciousness. The legal confrontation followed the same pattern. The Soviet lawsuit was quietly withdrawn. The American counterclaims were never filed. By agreeing not to talk about what had happened, both superpowers managed to step back from the nuclear brink without losing face or admitting wrongdoing. Yet disturbing questions remained unanswered. The official American narrative of what happened on July 27, 1953, remains that a Soviet transport was shot down because an ambitious ace pilot had been hunting for his 10th victory and simply attacked the first aircraft he came across, an unfortunate error made in the heat of the moment. But some have suggested that the evidence points to a more shocking explanation. According to intelligence sources, American spy agencies had learned that on July 27, 1953, high-ranking Soviet Pacific Fleet commanders were scheduled to fly from Port Arthur to Vladivostok aboard an IL-12. The passenger list was supposed to include senior naval officers, possibly even Marshal Rodion Malinovsky, the famous World War II commander who oversaw Soviet forces in the Far East. That very day, a party conference was indeed being held in the Soviet national base in Port Arthur, with the entire leadership of the Pacific Fleet in attendance. After the conference ended, these high-value targets were scheduled to board their IL-12 for their return journey to Vladivostok. For American intelligence agencies, such a target would have represented an unprecedented opportunity to decapitate the Soviet Pacific Fleet's command structure in a single stroke. The plan, according to this theory, went wrong in the most mundane way possible. The party conference dragged on longer than expected, running well past its scheduled conclusion. Rather than delay the flight indefinitely, Soviet controllers made the fateful decision to proceed with substitute passengers, the medical commission members and vacationing officers who were already waiting at the airfield. If American intelligence had been tracking the original flight plan, they would have had no way of knowing about this last-minute passenger substitution. The theory draws historical precedent from 1943, when American P-38 Lightning fighters successfully ambushed and shot down a transport carrying Japanese Admiral Yamamoto, the man who had orchestrated the attack on Pearl Harbor, demonstrating that such targeted assassinations were within the American military's operational capabilities and strategic thinking. Even if this theory is correct, whether Ralph Parr knew the true nature of his mission remains unclear. He may have genuinely believed he was hunting enemy aircraft in a legitimate combat zone. Or he may have been told just enough to ensure his cooperation, that intelligence had identified a high-value target, that the mission was authorized, that this was his chance for both patriotic service and double ace glory. Whatever really happened that day, Parr's career did not suffer negatively as a result of the IL-12 incident. He remained in the Air Force for another 23 years, going on to serve 2 tours in Vietnam, where he earned the Air Force Cross during the siege of Kazan. By the time he retired as a colonel in 1976, he'd flown over 640 combat missions across 3 wars and received more than 60 decorations, becoming the only pilot in history to earn both the Distinguished Service Cross and the Air Force Cross. When asked about the events of July 27, 1953, he denied any knowledge of a planned attack designed to eliminate high-profile targets. As far as he was concerned, the Soviet transport had simply been, quote, in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. It was a position he maintained until he passed away in 2012.